The AFC West is a really interesting division because each of the four teams, I think, has really interesting subplots about them. You've got the Denver Broncos coming off of their Super Bowl 50 victory. Now Peyton Manning is gone. The guy you've been waiting 4 years to be the heir apparent to Peyton Manning, Brock Osweiler, he also left in free agency to the Houston Texans. So now what's going to happen with that defense that lost some pieces, most notably a Malik Jackson, a Danny Trevathan? Is this defense going to be able to keep this team in a contending position? What goes on at the quarterback position? On the offensive side of the ball, you've got the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that seems to find themselves in the mix, but you wonder if they're ever going to take that next step, especially with Alex Smith leading the way. You look at the Oakland Raiders, a team that seems to be on the come-up. Is this going to be a team that can be poised to take over this division in the future? Can they continue that progression that they've made the past couple of years? The San Diego Chargers with Phillip Rivers at the helm and how they finished in 2015. Are they going to waste the last years of Phillip Rivers' career with a bad football team? So I was curious to see how this draft was going to break down for this division, and I've put all of the picks and the grades, best and worst picks, in the description box down below. You can check them out. Now I'm going to give you my thoughts kind of on the performance of the division as a whole. I'll go from worst to first. To me, the team that had the least impressive draft out of everybody in the AFC West was the Kansas City Chiefs. Honestly, when you look at this draft, I know I give them a C- grade, but there's a big part of me that almost looks at that draft and think it's kind of a buster draft. It has that kind of presence of being that, a buster kind of draft, where you have a lot of bust and not too much in terms of contributors. And for a team that is, in theory, some might say on the cusp, even though I would disagree with that assertion, you know, you have a limited window of opportunity, and there's an opportunity now with the uncertainty in Denver most notably, and whether or not Oakland's really ready to take that next step or not. You could, at least in the short term, run that division. But you look at the Chiefs and you look at this draft class, and I just wonder where the help is really going to come. Now, I don't knock them for trading back out of round number one. You know, they were trying to accumulate additional picks with what they lost, with the tampering shit in free agency with Jeremy Maclin. They lost their third rounder. So trading back and getting somebody like Chris Jones, it was a solid pick. You look at a lot of the rest of the picks in this draft, you know, Kavari Russell and Parker Ehringer. You know, just to me, it seemed like there were better players on the board. And then I also wonder with who they took in guys like Demarcus Robinson and Tyreek Hill, and even later on, Dottie Nicholas. You know, it seems like character and football character and adult character is secondary to the Kansas City Chiefs organization. Furthermore, when I look at it, you know, Demarcus Robinson was not a fourth-round talent in this draft. Tyreek Hill was not a fifth-round talent in this draft. Dottie Nicholas was barely probably a sixth-round talent in this draft. As a result, they're gambling on character guys, and they're not even gambling on character questionable guys and getting guys that are much more talented than when they actually took them. If anything, they reached on these character risks, and that to me seems like a bad combination. I just wonder what the priority is and what the emphasis is on for the Kansas City Chiefs. You know, I like the pick of Kevin Hogan in round 5. That was a good kind of value pick for them as a backup quarterback. Maybe long-term has some starting potential. But I think the Chiefs needed a lot more out of this draft class, frankly, than I believe they were actually going to get. The Oakland Raiders. You know, this is the team that 2014 had a really good draft. 2015 seemed pretty solid. So you're wondering here, 2016, is Reggie McKenzie going to get right the third year running? And while maybe some people question the selection of Karl Joseph at number 14, I most certainly do not. He was a top 12 player in this draft to me. So in any ways, the Oakland Raiders getting him at 14 is kind of technically a bit of a steal. Now, was he the best player available on the board, in my opinion, at that point in time? No. So maybe that was a mistake. But I love the selection of Karl Joseph for the Oakland Raiders and what he represents. This guy's a fucking bowling ball of machetes. I love the way he attacks ball carriers. I love the way he attacks the ball in the passing game. I love the instincts that he plays with, the physicality that he plays with. Some concerns maybe about if he can play that physical consistently at the NFL level without physically breaking down, perhaps. But I love the pick here for Karl Joseph. They needed a presence in the back end of that defense, and they got it right here. Unfortunately, after that pick, it seemed like this team kind of went off the rails, and every single pick for the next 4 rounds seemed to be at least 1, if not 2 rounds too high. I'm not surprised Jihad Ward went somewhere in round number 2. I know the upside is there. He is raw. and it's not a terrible pick for the Raiders. But again, there were better players available. Round 3, Shilique Calhoun from Michigan State. He's a better fit for a 4-3 defense like what Oakland is going to run. They may get some value out of him as a situational pass rusher, sure. But again, at this point in time in the draft, he felt like a 1 to 2 round reach to me. Then I look at Conor Cook in round number 4, and I just really don't understand the concept of trading up in round 4 to go get a backup quarterback when, frankly, to me, there were still better backups on the board. If I was going to trade up at this point in time to get a backup quarterback and make sure that I got him, I would have at least done it with Cardale Jones, who has much better arm talent and overall athletic talent and upside than a Conor Cook does. I just don't get why you would want to bring in a guy who has questions about his presence in the locker room and leadership and accuracy on top of that to be in that locker room to be a backup to David Carr. I don't get it. I thought it was a mistake. I thought it was a poor decision by Reggie McKenzie in that Raiders front office. Even DeAndre Washington in the 5th round, the running back, I thought there were better backs on the board at that point in time. It's just as the draft went along, I thought it got progressively worse for the Oakland Raiders. And like I said, I love the pick of Karl Joseph. And I think they got themselves some necessary help on the front of that defense. But I question not getting a linebacker earlier. Maybe where you're picking at 14, it's worth the Miles Jack gamble. Maybe it's worth the Darren Lee gamble instead. They didn't address linebacker until round 6. That I question that a little bit. Maybe they could have addressed wide receiver again here. Yes, I know you spent a 1st-round pick on Amari Cooper, but maybe somewhere along the way you could have addressed wide receiver. I question why when they did address running back, DeAndre Washington was the running back that they chose. It was a C grade to me. In large part, I'm not going to lie, it's because of how much I'm a fan of Karl Joseph and how good I think he could be at the back end of that Raiders defense. But this was not a stellar effort to me by the Raiders and Reggie McKenzie. And in particular, I thought it got progressively worse into day 2, and in particular, the beginning portion of day number 3. The Denver Broncos, you're talking about the defending Super Bowl champions. Peyton Manning's retired, which is probably for the better for the organization. But Brock Osweiler leaves via free agency. So there's a lot of buzz and a lot of talk about whether or not they're going to be the team that steps up and gets Paxton Lynch in round number 1. What are they going to do at the quarterback position? How are they going to plug some of these holes that have been created by departures via free agency? And I got to say, while it wasn't a super stellar draft for the Denver Broncos, I thought they did some decent work here. I really did. I mean, at the end of the day, they got Paxton Lynch. They got their guy at the tail end of round 1. They moved up to get him, but they didn't have to give up very much to get him. You had to make that move. You had to make that move. Now you bring him into a situation where he probably doesn't have to play immediately. He can sit behind Mark Sanchez a little bit while you groom him, while you work on him, while you develop him. But long term, for the Denver Broncos to come out of this draft with a 22-year-old Paxton Lynch and paying him very little per year, taking a very low salary cap hit for 4 years guaranteed, and then if you chose to, the option for the 5th year, which wouldn't be that costly, as opposed to the Houston Texans, who just signed a 26-year-old Brock Osweiler with like 7 career starts and gave him $18 million per year. I like the Denver Broncos' end of the deal on this. I thought they got the much better deal out of this. They got a similar type of guy to Brock Osweiler in some ways, and they got him 4 years younger and a hell of a lot cheaper. That was masterfully played by John Elway, I got to admit. Gotsis in round 2, I thought he was a reach, but I understand for the Broncos why they liked him so much, and I understand what his fit could be, and he could end up justifying this draft position. Thought Justin Simmons in round 3 was solid. Devontae Booker at the end of round 4 makes sense. That's about the draft range of where he should have went, and he could potentially be a steal for them. Even McGovern, the 5th round pick out of Missouri, the guard, could potentially long-term be a starter for them. I thought they got some good, solid pieces here, and at the end of the day, they got their franchise quarterback of the future potentially in Paxton Lynch. You've got to give them some benefit of the doubt because at the end of the day, John Elway's found some decent talents over the past few years. In the later portions of the draft, I would expect he's found 1 or 2 solid players in rounds 3 through 6 here. And again, if Paxton Lynch develops and he becomes that dude, and this draft looks a whole lot better. They deserve the B- they got, in my opinion. As a result, I would say the team that did the best was the San Diego Chargers. Not by much, because I really didn't like the 1st-round pick, but I thought they did some other things really well. Now, for the San Diego Chargers at number 3, I don't get the logic behind the Bosa pick. So there's a guy who played as a left end in a 4-3, not at all of 275 pounds. Now you're going to ask him to primarily play as a 3-4 defensive end. To me, if you're the Chargers and you're picking third, number one, the better defensive line prospect in this draft was DeForest Buckner. Number two, the more experienced 3-4 defensive end in this draft was DeForest Buckner. The better schematic fit in the 3-4 was DeForest Buckner. From a physical profile-wise, the ideal, almost prototypical 3-4 defensive end in this draft was DeForest Buckner. Now, some people might look at them and say they should have went offensive tackle here, and perhaps they should have. And there was a lot of buzz that they were talking about Ronnie Stanley, but apparently that was never going to be. I wonder if maybe it shouldn't have been offensive tackle. It shouldn't just been Tunsil anyways, because at the end of the day, you got to protect Phillip Rivers. Look, I don't think Bosa is going to be a bust. I think Bosa will be a solid NFL player, but I'm not taking a guy with a questionable schematic fit that lacks big-time pass rush upside at the NFL level third overall. I'm just not doing it. And I don't get why the Chargers felt it was necessary to do this. I really, really don't. And I question the logic when you have guys like Jalen Ramsey on the draft board of taking a Joey Bosa third here. It makes me question how Telesco pieced together the top of his draft board for 2016. Now, after that, I thought they did some really good work. Hunter Henry in round 2. You got that replacement for Ladarius Green, that long-term replacement potentially to Antonio Gates. You're giving Phillip Rivers some help. Max Tuerk, the center from USC. Center's been a gaping void to suck for this Chargers organization for a couple of years now. Tuerk could come in and potentially be a starter coming off of that knee injury. Joshua Perry in round 4. He's more football player than athlete, but he's a solid football player that at some point in time could start. Whether it be inside or outside, I'm not sure, but I expected to be a guy that contributes. Even Jatavis Brown in the 5th round, the linebacker/safety hybrid out of Akron. He's a guy, good athlete. You probably figure out a way to play him. Even the punter in the 6th round, they took Kaser. This is a guy that probably could be the punter for them for a long time. I thought they did some good work after round number 1, and frankly, if they would have taken DeForest Buckner or Jalen Ramsey at number 3, I got to be honest, this draft would look a whole lot better, and I probably would rate the Chargers as one of the 2 or 3 best teams in terms of performance and execution out of everyone in the 2016 NFL Draft. It's, again, not just to hammer the Bosa pick, because if I thought it was truly, truly ridiculous, I would hammer it a whole lot more, and y'all know that. I do think it was dumb, and I think it was the wrong choice and the wrong decision. Ultimately, history is only going to tell. But again, when I'm looking at it from a philosophical standpoint, you had a better schematic fit, a better natural fit, and a much more experienced 3-4 defensive end in DeForest Buckner, and you're taking Joey Bosa instead. This is like trying to fit the square peg into the round hole. And this reminds me in a slightly different way of a few years ago when we want to compare Joey Bosa to white defensive ends, and everybody wants to compare him to J.J. Watt because they're stupid. I go to the Bjorn Werner side. And Werner was a guy coming out of Florida State, about 255, 260 pounds. Not incredibly strong, but really not all that incredibly explosive to me either. But I had a feeling that because of his size profile, somebody would want to risk it and gamble on him as a 3-4 outside linebacker, as an edge rusher, and it was going to fail miserably. And it ultimately did. And the reason for that, in my opinion, was they were trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And when I look at the Bosa pick for the San Diego Chargers, I have some concerns about, again, whether they're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. I don't think the guy busts out, but I think you'll look back at this selection for the Chargers, and it'll be one of those things, yeah, he was okay, but, yeah, he wasn't a bust, but he maybe made a Pro Bowl or 2, but we passed up on this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. That's what this draft kind of reminds me of for the San Diego Chargers. I still gave him a B-, because I think overall the body of work was pretty good. It was actually somewhat impressive. They got guys at multiple levels in day 2 and day 3 that can help them and potentially be key contributors down the road. That's a good draft. When you look at this draft, do you think the San Diego Chargers ultimately got 3 to 4 potential future starters? To me, with Bosa, Henry, Tuerk, and maybe even Joshua Perry and or Jatavis Brown, I think the answer is yes. And you throw in the punter if you want to call him a starter. A lot of teams would want to come out of this draft acting like the San Diego Chargers did and getting what the San Diego Chargers got.